Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. So I welcome you all to another in the series studying the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13. And normally, to get things stimulated and starting, I normally ask a live audience whether they have any questions. But since in front of me is a blank space, I can't really do that. Almost a blank space. I can't really do that. So some of you may be joining actually this Bhagavad Gita series for the first time. And so a few preliminary words may be necessary. As to the general use of this scripture. The Upanishads are very abstract and very difficult to understand for the ordinary person, and they're designed to be elaborated on by vast commentaries with teachers, Upanishad, sitting at the feet of a teacher. And so Sri Krishna has given us this wonderful bouquet of ideas and flowers, like a garland, assembled that for the common person to understand in easy language. Not only that, but has taken philosophy to be practical. So everything that is stated in the Gita is made to be tested and must be tested in life, in the life of every person, and verified in their own lives. So apart from it being a kind of manual, a guiding manual on your practical life, it also deals with all your daily problems. Any solution that you require is all found here in this Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the longest philosophical poem in the world. So we are now on the 13th chapter, and having gone through a whole process of 12 other chapters, the last chapter being centered around devotion. Devotion means I take the absolute and take it in a personal way and relate to it with the idea of feeling it and contacting that. And doing it in a non-demanding way. Fixing our mind, fixing our whole attention on that. But then from the 13th chapter onwards, we find that it is to do with the principles of it. Does that mean it's no longer practical? Not at all. We have to get used to the idea, I am not the body, I am something intrinsically much deeper than that. That in my inner essence is what the philosophy calls Atman or self. Normally when we think of self, we think of a physical self, or even an expanded version of a psychophysical self. But we have to make this distinction. Imagine if every child was taught this distinction. See, unfortunately, when children are brought up, an insertion is made. A kind of natural parental concern is there, which says, don't climb a tree because you might hurt yourself. It never occurred to the child that it would hurt itself. Now it's fearful that it might. Or it falls down and cuts his knee, and the parent naturally fusses as if the whole leg required amputation and inserts pain in the child. The child wasn't crying up to that point. But now you see it becomes emotionally charged from the parent. And all of these small things that seem humanly natural to us are really small building blocks toward this entrenched position in an my dear child, you are the body. If this philosophy was applied at very early age, we would find a whole shift in our position. Because as soon as you cease to identify with the body, all your association with pain goes. All your various difficulties goes on the one side. On the other side, peace enters, joy enters. And we're looking for a peaceful and joyful life. Why don't we get it? Because the glory of this self is here, but our attention is pitched elsewhere. If we were able to bring the attention back and understand in a habitual way, I'm not the body. I am this eternal, infinite, invisible presence that sits, as it were, within and through and as and beyond. If we had that understanding, then much of the world's difficulties would shift and change. Man's inhumanity to man would also change. And so this is the practical application of a chapter here, 13, which distinguishes the self and the non-self. What is described here in this language as the field and the knower of the field. A kind of witnessing, knowing, thinking entities set separately, and an objective entity called the field. It is this field that modern science studies. And there's a complaint from materialist science who try to get involved in the deeper aspects of life. In other words, in the aspect which we can classify as a knower of the field, what religion calls God. And they say, where is this God? I always remember when the first cosmonauts went up into space. And at that point, the Russian president or chairman was Khrushchev. And it was Yuri Gagarin who was the first cosmonaut out in outer space. And Soviet Union at that time, being atheistic and built on atheistic and materialist principles, Mr. Khrushchev declared publicly, said, you see, our man went up into space. He looked left, he looked right, he looked up, he looked down, and he never found this God. It's away from an atheistic position, not described in traditional religious terms, but described in similar terms to what we find here in this 13th chapter. And so we find such language as observer, observed. We find coming to the fore a very important study of consciousness. What is consciousness? But the problem is they put this consciousness into the field part, into the observable part. And science's job is to highlight what we can observe, what we can test, what we can make a model of. Not what is the knower. And it's a very simple question. If you talk about subjective consciousness, you simply ask the question, who knows this? Who is the knower? There must be some entity that witnesses all the varying changes and all the various events going on in a passage of time and not going with them, unchanging, standing there. So this investigates this question. You know, the Charvakas, who were more materialistically atheistic as a philosophy in the ancient days, they felt because this entity was incomprehensible, you can't pinpoint this entity. You can't put this entity into a test tube and see, is it acid or alkaline? You can't see how long or short it is. You can't get the Lord's email address or any of these things. They abandoned it. And they were a heterodoxical movement. Heterodoxical means they didn't believe in the authority of the Vedas. And there, in the structure of the Vedas, in terms of nature, we find everything inherited from the Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy, despite the disagreements on their final conclusions, was really a description of this nature, a wonderful, wonderful overview describing 24 tattvas or principles. And there we find these great, great elements, these mahabhutas, that everything comes from this. Everything in this observable universe is a modification of this, and every variation of it is due to 3 evolutionary forces. That was their simple analysis of the universe. This is taken for granted in this chapter. But you see, these Charvakas said, we cannot acknowledge that very, very subtle, essential matter, also interpreted as space, we can't latch onto that since we cannot see it. There's no observable evidence for it. Taking the whole position of materialist atheists today, echoing the same sentiment. I can't see it. And Sri Ramakrishna has a delightfully simple way of putting it. The fact that you cannot see the stars in the daytime does not mean they do not exist. The fact that you have no observable evidence for something doesn't mean to say you have to jump to a conclusion of non-existence. And when you jump to this conclusion of non-existence, what is called ex nihilo, it doesn't make much sense. Something has to be there. Something foundational has to be there. What is it? And so the Upanishads declare this. They declare this internal self of yours, of you as Atman, and they declare that the fundamental basis, the screen as it were, on which everything is projected, is called Brahman. This is a Brahman, which has no forms, no legs, no mind, nothing of this nature. And we can say at best, it is pure being. It is pure being, it is pure existence, it is pure consciousness. And it is infinite in its nature. And it is blissful also. So with this bare minimum description, they can't actually say what it is. One day, Sri Ramakrishna says, I'm going to tell you everything. He made this declaration. He said, I'm going to tell you today, I will not keep anything secret, he said. So he described clearly all the various levels and layers that we can explore as a sample of the totality of the universe. If we can explore and understand what am I in every way, at every level, then we can decide what the whole universe is. This is a fundamental principle that was applied. First axiom, if the law of nature is constant here, it is constant everywhere. And modern science, to some extent, has this opinion. So, we are simply following that. He wants to know, therefore, what is this principle? How does it look in us? If we are able to unfold every layer and level of the mind, how does this look? The mind being the most subtle component that we have. And so this is what we call the chakras. This is what we call these levels, layers of consciousness. And having clearly described these centers corresponding to our experiences up to the level of the heart, as in yogic language and yogic concepts, and in yogic concepts, the level of the throat, and then pointing to the spot between the eyebrows, what we call ajna, he said, the Supreme Self is directly known and the individual experiences samadhi when the mind comes up to here. And saying this, the moment that he tried to go beyond that, he broke down. He found it impossible to go any further. In his own words, he says, the mother does not allow me to speak. And so with tears in his eyes, unable to verbalize or express or formulate anything, as soon as speech comes, you've now introduced a distortion of it. You've now introduced a lesser understanding, or you've now brought the mind into the realm of even subtle time and space. And so he gives an example for this. He says, as if the mother is pressing my mouth, I'm unable to speak any further. And he gives a famous example of a salt doll wanting to explore the vastness of the ocean, goes toward it and enters into it, and naturally, completely dissolved. Now, who is there to come back and tell us of this vast ocean? Disappears, disintegrates, where nearness becomes oneness, enters into purity. That is the level that we call this pure consciousness, this ultimate, this subtle, that cannot be seen, cannot be known in an objective way, and yet can be known because that supreme entity is the knower itself. And when we have this identity of knower, knowledge, and the known all merging in one and the same thing, then no more to be done, because we have reached the equivalence of our freedom. So this important chapter, to give you this overview, tells us that there are two things that exist. Everything is constituted of these two things. And here again, we are following the line of Sankhya Yoga. We classify it into what is called Prakriti and Purusha. That is nature. Nature, not in the sense of you look out into a forest. You are also part of the nature. It means all these classified 24 principles. That is all the gross experience that we know of, the observable universe that we know of, confined to all sense organs, confined to the objects of the senses and the mind. And then all the organs of action. This constitutes 16 elements. And all of these are simply modifications, wave modifications. It's not a mystery when we look at the science of quantum mechanics, where this very, very great mystery is there is this matter that we view in atomic particulate state. Is it a wave or is it a particle? This so-called wave-particle duality is a great mystery requiring many different theoretical interpretations. But the Sankhya's worked it out a long time ago. As these subtle elements combine and cross a kind of border, what some people might call decoherence, it goes from wave to a particular individual thing that is easily registered by us. And this is simply the surface of the surface of the surface, the crest of a wave, nothing more. Because there are other elements to consider. And when these 5 elements combine and recombine, these what we call tanmatras, combine and recombine, they produce the visible world that we know of. Everything is resolved into these 5 basic elements. We are told that if we understand these elements, we are told in the Ashtavakra Gita, if we understand these simple elements and understand everything else, the modification of them, then we have arrived at our destiny. We have our freedom as soon as we know this. So as soon as we know the nature of nature itself, as soon as we make this distinction, not just make it, but believe it. Not just believe it, but connect with it. Truly know it, truly understand it, so that it becomes a part and parcel of our habitual being. When that level of conviction is there, then immediately, we get our freedom. Like lighting a light in a cave or a dark place that has been dark for 1,000 years, Krishna's example, one strike of a match will dispel the darkness. That's all that's required. It doesn't matter how long it was in the dark. And freedom doesn't mean something to be acquired, it's just convenience language. Freedom is a self-revelation. It's bringing the mind into the condition whereby this self-revelation occurs by itself. You can't get it by meditation, you can't get it by karma yoga, bhakti yoga. All these yogas are mentioned in this very chapter as a means of how to get this. But means in the sense that it's just an opening way. It's just making way. It's just making the crooked path straight so that revelation can come from within. And so there was a thought. Every day we bring out a thought. And that thought mentioned today had this whole chapter in mind. That you see sometimes, particularly in where we live, in the Irish weather, where you can get 4 seasons in one day, you'll find all of a sudden clouds, dark clouds come. Before they weren't there. You look out of the window and you see bright blue skies, brilliant sunshine streaming through the windows. And then you go for breakfast or something and you come back and you see it's all overcast, beautifully dark clouds on the horizon. And we know, all right, Rainstorms may come, or can they, or will they? No, they may blow off and away as quickly as they came. And so Sri Ramakrishna also gives this example for Maya. Maya equivalent to nature itself. And to say that dark clouds can come, a cloud may come. As quickly as it comes, it can go. And somebody who has a sensitive mind, a pure mind, who sees the fun of it, will understand that these clouds resemble very much the cloudy nature of life itself that comes and goes very, very quickly, very spontaneously. And against it is the background of the sky. In the same way, against it is this background of the other component. What is that other component? Purusha. So we have these two classifications, Prakriti and Purusha, using the language that Sankhya's and Yogas use. Sri Krishna was a great reformer, reconciling all the different strands of thoughts of his day and using the language of other philosophies that may have been or seem to be in opposition. Every great teacher comes and reconciles all these disparate strands and movements and brings them to unity. When we have a unity, we have the access to our freedom. You may even say unity and freedom are synonymous. When we get more to a point of unity, we get closer to this inherent freedom. And then this chapter also covers that this is the nature of the field, which can be viewed also as a vehicle. So we find that there's reference in the Kathopanishad to 11-gated city, also in the Gita as 9-gated city, as a vehicle that moves us in this direction, something that is useful. It's not our enemy. We don't have to dispose of it. If we had to do that, then maybe suicide is the best option. But it's not an inconvenience. It's a means that has a function, not just a name and a form, but also a function. And that function can be used in the context of nature, which we can see in the same way as we see a cloud coming and going. A playful aspect is there to nature, not easily understood in the face of tragedy. In the face of suffering and tragedy, we can't easily say it's a mere game. But the fact is that on close analysis, we find it has all the characteristics of a coming and going, an ephemeral reality, a relative reality, only relative to certain circumstances. And these great philosophers went one step further and said, not just to our superficial circumstances of our waking state, but also relative to all our states of consciousness. We have a waking state of consciousness, but then soon we drift off with great confidence and surrender. Even if you're a tiger living in a forest, you still close your eyes and sleep, not worrying whether there is an attack around the corner or prey nearby. That level of security is part and parcel of an attitude we need to cultivate in spiritual life too. And so the vehicles of revelation are there, and these are part and parcel of the constituents of what we call the field, the kshetra, the field of experience. And as all fields are, we know, have a causal relationship. Even in an agricultural field, you plant something, you'll get a result. So you'll get a fruit. And so we have the fruits of all our actions. All these fruits of our actions, if we make them selfish, in other words, if we think that we are the field or intrinsically connected with the field and not associated with it, then this association is called egoism. And this is one of the greatest obstacles that we have. That is why it is very important that at a young age, a child is taught this dissociation, along with other things, as much as possible, in a subtle way. To arrive at this, a self-culture is required, another component of this 13th chapter. We have to get all the various values, starting off with humility and modesty and all these various things, and purity of mind, concentration, all these things have to be developed, forbearance, All of these have to be cultivated well. And so this is a practical thing. It is not just teaching you the principles of what is the field, or what is the know of the field, some abstract philosophy, but it's also teaching you, if you want to understand this properly, then the mind has to be reformed. The mind has to be polished. The mind has to be imbued with positive values and virtues. And so we find a practical list of all these virtues that we can cultivate. A diligent student will systematically adopt these particular cultural aspects, what we call discipline, cultivation, streamlining the will to make it stronger. And then this Purusha, the language changes, and Brahman comes out, this term. And Brahman is defined. How do you define the indefinable? You define it by mixed language, almost paradoxical language. Language such as it is near and it is far, both are there. Language such as it without any of these modifications still pervades all these modifications. These are the kind of concepts that come out. It is both here and it is beyond. This is the language also of modern science, that it is a language of, it is an indescribable aspect at the very smallest of levels. And even at the largest cosmological levels, how do we explain the subtleties of an origin? It's very difficult. We have to invoke, and this is the typical way we do it, we have to invoke the quantum world, the world of subtlety, not understanding how it is, not seeing it, not having a cohesive theory that combines all the observable things that we have and are, and all the laws that operate there, but also the different set of laws at the subtlest subatomic levels. And so, in defining this, we also have, and we left this off last week, the effects of evolving wisdom comes out. And so this brings us really up to the 16th stanza of this 13th chapter. So, having said within and without all beings, how can you be within and without? Seem to be paradoxically contradictory, unmoving and also moving. But then it explains why this seeming paradox is there. It's because of its subtlety. Because of its subtlety, it's incomprehensible. It's both far and near. How can that be so? Well, we have some examples, of course. How can the electromagnetic field be near and far? We know that we can tap into it here and there, wherever. We don't have to go to a separate place to catch a radio or television broadcast, as long as we can know what the frequency is, as long as we know what hertz to tune it into, we can tune into a wavelength. And when we do that, and we understand what is the frequency, then we can get the tuning, not because we went to a faraway place to get it, but because we knew how to do the tuning. And then you see, we have this Ramakrishna's statement associated with the next stanza, and this was the inspiration for the thought this morning. Ramakrishna gives a story. A holy man once saw clouds appearing suddenly in the clear sky and disappearing again, blown by the wind. And this sight threw him into raptures. When you see this scene, does it throw you into raptures? Does it catch your imagination in the same way? And he exclaimed, Brahman is contentless consciousness. Content without content in this sense. Consciousness, like the clear sky. And also, the sky represents for us this sense of pure consciousness and pure infinity. When we do the personality development courses, we find that some people have a natural liking for some colors. And those people who have an intellectual bent, they like blue. because for them, blue represents some kind of intelligence or some kind of infinite wisdom, something along those lines. On the other hand, red for some people will symbolize activity, restlessness, sometimes anger, sometimes negative emotion. For others, it represents love and sacrifice. So there are these different and sometimes standard representations of values that we have. But it goes on. He says, as clouds appear in the latter, that is in the clear blue sky, the universe of beings appears in the former and then disappears too. Brahman remains ever itself. It's a beautiful example and simple example given by Sri Ramakrishna. And the stanza that goes with it is like this. Avibhaktam cha bhuteshu vibhaktam iva cha stitam bhuta bhatra cha tajneyam grashishnu prabhavishnu cha. He is avibhaktam, undivided, and yet he seems to be divided in all beings. And we have to use this language of seems or appearance. It appears to be like this. How do we get from pure being to becoming? We have to assume that it is an appearance, because all the evidence that is there in the field shows that the factors of multiplicity and variability and changeability means the lack of fixedness in it means that to that extent it's not real. It's only real relative to something. And so when we try and find out what is the actual existence that is there, what is the actual reality that is there, we have to, by the very nature of things, eliminate all the variabilities. This doesn't normally occur to us. It doesn't seem natural to us. And yet, when we examine it closely, when we examine it carefully, based on the examination already previously done by these saints and sages, and already the groundwork being done here by Sri Krishna. So this is the language. It seems to be existing, stitam, and he is to be known as the supporter of beings. It's not that God made the world and went on holiday. Made the world and entered into it is the language. Supported it, is the supporter of all beings. And then a beautiful picture can be conjured up. And that is Grashishnu, devouring and also generating, Prabhavishnu, generating as well. You see, when we look at nature in a broader context, even on a cosmological basis, we see galaxies devouring galaxies. We see animals devouring animals. We even see humans devouring animals. So you can see this devouring nature. And the key characteristic of this prakriti, of this nature, is really threefold: space, time, and function. And we see, when we see the space and time and function, we see that time is a devourer. Time devours everything. Time is a consumer. We saw this in the 11th chapter of this Bhagavad Gita, in the description of the cosmic form, but generates as well. So this birth and life and death is going on continuously, supporting, devouring, and generating. Now, a very significant passage comes on now. Jyotisham api jyotish tamasaha param uchate jnanam jnanam jnanagamyam hridi sarvasya vishishtatam. The light of all lights. This is a very, very common term in most religions. I can even go as far as to say all religions. I might be wrong on this, but it's religious fervor. This kind of concept, a light of all lights. We can see the expressions in various Upanishads that we have this idea that he who lights the sun, for example, or there the sun cannot illumine, nor the moon, nor the stars, nor this lighting. And what to speak of the fire in your house? In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find a beautiful dialogue. King Janaka and Yajnavalkya, great sage, they meet. And naturally, Janaka is very interested in philosophy. And Yajnavalkya is in a funny mood. You see, these Upanishads are not all seriousness. There's a little humor too. So the question is, can you please tell me, what is that, that lights the way? A man can walk, a man can work, a man can eat, So what is it? What is that light that lights the way in this? Naturally, Yajnavalkya says, oh, that's easy. It's the sun. And that, of course, is just a superficial argument. And then, of course, he's now got to go on, all right. But when the sun is down and the moon is out, what is that lights the way? And so it goes on like that. Having eliminated the sun, having eliminated the moon, the next thing is the stars. When the stars are gone, then there's fire. But ultimately, when there's nothing else, not even hearing, then what do you find? That is the light of the self. That is the thing that never goes down. So this is the light of the lights. This is that which makes the sun shine, that which is behind the sun. He shining, all things shine is the expression. It's a wonderful expression, the light of lights. A wonderful expression for meditation purposes. Earlier on, we picked this theme up to some extent and followed it through, that this is the light of lights. And you can make a wonderful chain of thoughts, a wonderful pilgrimage, a wonderful pathway, thinking that there's a connection between all things that are lit. Even when the eyes shine, something is there that lights it from within. When you think that your neighbor is criticizing you or not liking you, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is that makes the eyes sparkle? Is it not that same thing that makes all the other lights shine? Is it not the light of all lights? So this particular vision is very useful. Again, the 13th chapter is elucidating the fundamental principle between the self and the non-self. And you may say, well, why so much repetition? Why attack it from this angle? Why bring it out from that angle? The Upanishads are saying exactly the same thing, but saying it in different ways. If you didn't catch it in one way, it'll tell you in another way. Because of its importance and because we're not really grasping it at a fundamental understanding level, it's necessary to repeat this in graphic, creative language. The light of lights. We all owe a great debt to our own lamp in this solar system, the sun itself. Without that sun, there's no life. We're all running on borrowed sunlight, borrowed energy. It's all the sun's. We cannot attribute anything of our own. We cannot create an ownership. This is my life. We don't even digest our food. We think we may do, but we're deluded if you think that that's the case. And if it wasn't for the wonderful miracle of photosynthesis, the sun rays and photons don't get caught. And now we know that modern science, the more it advances, the more we see the subtle nature, even at the botanical level, even at the biology level. At the biology level, on one end, the cosmological understanding on the other, we find these two avenues going to more and more subtle, impossibly indescribable areas. Now, what they understand is that the simple process taken for granted of photosynthesis involves a quantum step. If it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for a principle of tunneling, then all the waves, when it's converted into superposition of waves, not to get too technical, Without that step, the process of the photosynthesis doesn't work. These are new discoveries. And so the more we go into this, the more we realize how these ancient sages made these original discoveries through the pure avenue and instrumentation of concentration only. Divine grace and concentration. Divine grace because concentration itself is a flow of grace. Thought itself is grace arriving at our substation for our use. We have no claim on it. So there's a wonderful passage, the light of lights. And we see there, what is that light that lights our way? Is this question asked there? And then these beautiful passages we highlighted in various places. Katha Upanishad highlights it. The Taittiriya Upanishad makes reference to it. By its light, the whole universe is lighted, is the expression and understanding. This beautiful, beautiful expression, light of lights. So it tells us the light of all lights. He is said to be beyond darkness. Knowledge, the knowable, the goal of knowledge, seated in the hearts of all. There's a wonderful phrase put out in the 14th century. There was a great Christian mystic who was much criticized and eventually made into a Christian saint, purely on the basis of his holiness. He was a student, his guru was the 14th century mystic, German mystic, Meister Eckhart. So this great saint had a very simple statement to make. And he said that God, the only entity that is so vast and yet so near within me, that whole understanding is a universal understanding picked up by all those investigated mystics. So though the sun and stars are self-luminous to some extent, we can't say that the sun is entirely not self-luminous, because we have this wonderful drama occurring where hydrogen, through the magic again of quantum mechanics, through the magic of tunneling, as it's described, is able to make a conversion, an energy conversion into helium. And that then creates a radiation through many, many layers and levels of the sun and radiates to us. And so, self-luminous to that extent, and every star is playing this drama, but they lose their luminosity. Everything loses its luminosity when, according to this Vedic perception and Sankhya perception, that everything goes into its termination, what we call pralaya, its potential state. And in this potential state, buddhi acquires the power of understanding from the Atman even. We can't say we have our own intelligence, or we can't say that the cosmos has its intelligence. It comes essentially from a more foundational area. It also loses that borrowed faculty when everything dissolves. Just as you lose your ownership and identity when your waking state dissolves into a dream, and when your dream dissolves into a dreamless sleep. In dreamless sleep, you can't identify anything. All divisions are gone. There's no sense of time or space or causation or function. Nothing is there except a registered peace. But the Atman, of course, never loses its light. The physical light and darkness, characteristic of inert matter, they don't have any effect on or access to this Atman. In pitch darkness, one is not able to see one's own body and clothing, but that darkness is no hindrance to the self-cognizing or the self-cognizing, cognizant of its own presence. And this self-cognizance is not approved upon by the presence of sunlight. So we get the idea. Self-awareness is self-evidence. Because of the light it has acquired from the Atman enshrined in the heart. So the senses perceive, the mind feels, the intellect cogitates, not independently. It only does it because of that light that they get from this Atman. Now Sri Ramakrishna has this to say. He who realizes Ishvara, Ishvara means God in the personalized form. He who realizes Ishvara, the Lord, that is, in his heart is able to realize him outside too. And he who has known him within himself cannot cognize him elsewhere. Once you understand it in here, you understand it everywhere. And therefore, he who sees God in his heart sees him everywhere. Don't think, as is the accusation sometimes, that saints and hermits and so on are looking for their own salvation. Maybe in the beginning it might be true, but ultimately when they find that inner treasure, that self within, that God within, then they see this everywhere. I suppose we have to also mention and try and put it in the same context this week that we're in, because for the Christians, a sacred week has started. And it started really from Thursday onwards. But now we're into what Christians describe as Holy Week. And Holy Week really culminates in a few days and commemoration of events within those days. And we can see there a kind of spiritual evolution that takes place. It starts off with a meal dedicated to a Passover feast. Passover is a celebration of a group of people, enslaved people, who, whether we find it historically true or not, it makes no difference, migrated from Egypt into the desert under harsh conditions and were provided for all along the way. And their goal was the land of milk and honey. We can say a land of freedom. So this theme of slavery and freedom is celebrated in the Jewish world. Now it was common for everybody to assemble into Jerusalem for this Passover feast. But if you don't even think of it in any kind of religious context, if you just are oblivious to it, as many people are, for example, at Christmas, many people are oblivious to Christmas as a celebration of the birth of Christ. Or Diwali, for example, some people are oblivious to its inner spiritual meaning. And so we go from food, just a meal, that represents or can represent for us the mere basic catering for our needs, just awareness of the human body in this context as a mere field, as a field of endeavor, a kshetra. Sustaining it, we all have to eat. And then you find that if you explore the story, it develops into a spiritual field, not a spiritual field in the first place, a religious field. So there's an advance. There is a kind of evolution, an evolutionary development step by step that goes from an awareness of the body, represented as eating food, to awareness of some subtle investigation, maybe brought about by tragedy, or just an awareness and reverence for tradition. And then it becomes a religious festival, a religious feast. And then it goes one step further, because the feast is made into a spiritual event. It is a commemoration of a Christ. It is there in the company of a Christ, getting the grace of the Christ. And in some religions, it is there as a transformation from mere bread and mere wine into something that is absolutely mystical and sacred, that represents a kind of inner mystical being that we are here calling Atman. And then that leads up to a series of events, and the series of events would be characterized by Jesus being under arrest. And so, in this same way, being arrested and going through much suffering and torture and so on and so forth, It is our attachment to the body and this world that gives us all this pain. This world is full of pain and full of pleasure. Both are there. Both the good and the bad are there. Both the positive and the negative are there. And so we want to get away from this pain. And how do we do it? On the Good Friday, the surrender on the cross, representing, if you look at it in this way, the surrender of the ego. We take the attachment from the body away. Somebody said, you see, if you take the cross, what is it? It's one pole, it can represent I, and then you cross it out. And then that doesn't end there. The best is still to come, because once the ego goes, the glory of one's freedom comes. It's called resurrection. The glory of one's own Godhead gets revealed. So these are the various important events directly associated with this chapter in a beautiful way. And so, how do we get to this understanding of knowledge in an easy way, this jnana? After all, we are suffering from ignorance, and the only antidote is knowledge. And so the solution comes in the next stanza, and this will be the last stanza that we do. Iti kshetram tata jnanam nyeyam chokdam samashataha madbhakta etad vidnyaya madbhavayo kabhajati. Thus, kshetram, yes, the field as well as the knowledge or the knower of the field and that which is to be known have been briefly described. My devotee, says Sri Krishna, on knowing this is fitted for my state. He's saying, this is the fact of it, this is what we're aiming for, but you can do it by love of God. Selfless love of God, you can do it. And he puts it in this language. My devotee, those who are devoted to me and all my variations, manifestations from the cosmic mind as a personal God, on knowing this is fitted for my state. That means this complete jnana. Through bhakti, you can get jnana. Once you now have this avenue, this polished mind, this clear way, then you'll know everything. Once you ascend a mountain, then you have the whole vista ahead of you. And so, on whatever object we direct our entire attention, we are still able to understand that the object, we're able to understand the object in its true state, because concentration is a revealer. It peels away the various subtle layers that are in front of us. When we look at this world, it looks like a world that is deterministic, full of shapes, full of dimensions, a three-dimensional world, something that is tangible to us. When we investigate it more, we find it's more subtle than that. It's not exactly as it seems. There's a great astrophysicist and from Harvard University, I think it is, and he says, this world is a mere approximation of what is. And he also declares himself as agnostic, leaning toward atheism. But at least this much he acknowledges, that this world is just an approximation of what is. So he who is absorbed in devotion to God is able to know him, know that God in all the aspects. And it is jnana, knowledge, when man understands that God alone is revealing himself as everything. We start a process of seeing God in everything, and then through everything, and now as everything. And this wisdom places him forever in the presence of Ishvara. What a wonderful thing. So soaked as he is in the thought and feeling of God, he dwells with God day and night, every moment, every second, everywhere he turns, everywhere he looks, everything he hears, everything touches, everything is like the Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to gold. He alone is a jnani, a person of knowledge, who has realized Ishvara, this personal God, He becomes like a babe after God realization. The baby has no individuality of its own. It is fully dependent. And therefore, divinity beams through it. So this attitude of surrender and bhakti leads us to a point of absolute knowledge where there's no doubt or sense of insecurity. A pure and beautiful sleep occurs, and we still go through life, but with a new understanding, with no sense of fear, no sense of doubt, no sense of even slight insecurity. No matter what in life seems to knock us, or no matter what era seems to be dark and difficult, by this knowledge, all of that fear and doubt goes away. So this is the practical aspect then of this philosophical chapter, chapter 13, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Vibhaga Yoga. And next week we'll go on to a different subject. And so we'll go pick up the theme of, we start off by understanding these two things, Prakriti and Purusha, are actually eternal verities. In fact, the next stanza would say, know that Prakriti and Purusha are both without beginning, and know also that all modifications and gunas are born of Prakriti. In a nutshell, we have described that all these things that we see are merely modifications of 5 key things, and how they brought about through the action of 3 evolutionary forces that we call gunas. This is fundamentally Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, as we know of them, and it's fundamentally the whole mechanism of the Sankhya's adopted here. We can compare it to an ocean. Sometimes the ocean is calm, says Sri Ramakrishna. Sometimes it's placid, and sometimes it's boisterous. But we know it's one ocean. So in this same way, Brahman is both actionless and also active. When freed from action, he is termed Brahman. And when he's active, he's called Maya or nature, Prakriti. So with these ideas, this coming week, it will be good to reflect on this, incorporate it as part of your meditation, and to understand the benefits of thinking in this way until it becomes habitual for you. And with that, we say, God bless you wherever you are, and peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.